My name is Ibrahim Traore. I serve as the president of Burkina Faso, a country in West Africa where the desert wind often carries both hardship and hope across the land. I have spent much of my life in service, first as a soldier, then as a leader. Yet in moments of quiet reflection, I still see myself simply as a man trying to do what is right before God. Leadership is not only about decisions made in offices or meetings. Often the most important decisions come in the silent hours of the night, when the world is asleep and your conscience is awake. That is where my story begins. On the morning of March 10th, 2026, I stood at a military checkpoint in the desert near the border region between Burkina Faso and Niger. The air was dry and cold before sunrise. Sand stretched in every direction, broken only by a long line of military vehicles and soldiers standing quietly beside them. In front of us were 75 cargo trucks that had been intercepted during the night. They looked ordinary from a distance: dust-covered metal, closed cargo doors, engines still warm from long travel across the desert. But nothing about their movement had been normal. The trucks had not traveled together as a convoy. Each one had been spaced roughly 20 minutes apart. They carried no transport permits. They had no official license plates. Most importantly, they were using a dirt path through the desert that did not exist on any official map. When the first truck was opened, everything changed. The soldiers who opened the door froze in silence. Inside the truck were not goods or supplies. Inside were people. Dozens of people packed tightly together in suffocating heat. Women, young men, and frightened children. Their faces were exhausted, their lips cracked from dehydration. Some were barely conscious. That truck was only the first. When we finished inspecting all the vehicles, the number shocked everyone present. More than 900 human beings had been hidden inside those 75 trucks. They had been deceived with promises of work and opportunity. Instead, they had been captured and transported by a transnational human trafficking network that planned to sell them across the desert into North Africa and the Middle East. It was one of the most disturbing operations my country had ever uncovered. But what stayed with me most deeply was not only the crime itself, it was how we found it. Because the truth is something I have rarely spoken about publicly. Before we stopped those trucks, before our soldiers established the checkpoint, before our drones tracked the convoy, I had already been warned, not by intelligence reports, not by satellites, but through 3 signs that appeared in the days leading up to the operation. At first, those signs seemed unrelated. One was a dream, one was a report from a border officer, one was a discovery made by surveillance technology. But slowly, piece by piece, the pattern became clear. I came to believe that Jesus Christ was guiding us toward a truth hidden in the desert. If I had ignored those signs, 75 trucks might have disappeared into the Sahara. More than 900 people might never have been seen again. And that is why I must tell this story carefully. Because sometimes God does not speak through thunder or miracles. Sometimes he speaks through small warnings that arrive quietly, one by one, until a person finally understands. This is the story of the 3 signs that led us to rescue more than 900 lives. And it began 5 days before the checkpoint, with a dream that woke me in the middle of the night. The first sign came quietly, during a night that seemed completely ordinary. It was the 5th of March, 2026 in Ouagadougou. That evening had been long but not unusual. My day had been filled with meetings about border security, agricultural supply routes, and the continuing challenges our nation faced across the Sahel. These discussions are common for leaders in this region. The desert is beautiful, but it is also unforgiving, and many forces move through it unseen. By the time the evening ended, the city had grown quiet. From the window of the presidential residence, I could see the faint lights of Ouagadougou stretching across the darkness. The sounds of traffic had faded. Only the distant hum of the city remained. I remember feeling a deep sense of exhaustion. Leadership can weigh heavily on the mind. Decisions affect thousands, sometimes millions of lives. And even when a day ends, the thoughts do not always rest easily. That night I prayed before going to sleep. It was not a long prayer, just a quiet moment asking God for wisdom and protection for my country. Then I lay down. Sometime later I found myself inside a dream so vivid that it did not feel like sleep. I was standing in the desert. The sky above me was dark, but the stars were bright and clear. The wind moved softly across the sand. Everything around me felt real, almost sharper than ordinary life. At first the desert seemed empty. Then, in the distance, I saw movement. A long line of headlights appeared on the horizon. They were trucks. One after another, they moved across the desert, cutting through the darkness like a silent river of light. Their engines were low and steady. They did not travel together in a single convoy. Instead, each truck followed the same path but kept a distance from the others. The pattern was strange. One truck passed. Then darkness returned for a moment. Then another truck appeared. Then another. And another. They moved quickly, as if trying to outrun something behind them. Or perhaps trying to hide from something ahead. In the dream, I tried to understand what I was seeing. Something about the trucks felt wrong. There were no markings on them, no escort vehicles, no visible cargo, just closed metal containers moving through a place where no road should exist. The desert around them was silent. Then I heard something else. At first it was faint, so faint that I thought it might be the wind. But slowly it became clearer. It sounded like voices, not loud voices, weak voices. The kind of sound that travels when someone inside a closed space is trying to be heard. A knocking, a cry, a desperate attempt to reach someone outside. In the dream I stepped forward, trying to see more clearly. The trucks kept moving. The lights passed one by one. Then suddenly the scene changed. The headlights disappeared. The desert went dark again. And I woke up. It was still night in Ouagadougou. The room was quiet. For a moment, I did not move. I simply lay there, breathing slowly, trying to understand why the dream had felt so real. Some dreams fade almost immediately after waking. This one did not. Every detail remained clear in my mind. The trucks, the desert, the strange spacing between the vehicles, and most of all, the voices. I sat up in the bed and looked at the clock beside me. It was a little after 3 in the morning. For several minutes I remained still, thinking. I have had many dreams in my life, like anyone else. Most are fragments of thoughts from the day, random images that mean nothing by morning. But occasionally there are dreams that leave a different kind of feeling. Not fear, not confusion, but a quiet certainty that the dream was showing something important. That was the feeling I had that night. I cannot claim that every dream comes from God. No person should speak so boldly. But in my heart, I felt strongly that this dream carried meaning. I felt that Jesus Christ was showing me something that would soon matter. Still, at that moment I had no proof, no report, no intelligence, no evidence of any trafficking convoy moving through the desert. Only a dream, and a strange sense that I should remember it. So I did something simple. I wrote it down. On a small notebook I keep beside the bed, I recorded everything I could remember. The trucks, the desert, the spacing between the vehicles, the voices I heard inside. Then I closed the notebook and prayed again. I asked God for wisdom. If the dream meant something, I asked that the truth would reveal itself. If it meant nothing, then I asked for peace of mind. Then I returned to sleep. When morning came, the responsibilities of leadership returned quickly. Meetings began again. Reports arrived from different regions of the country. Security briefings covered several ongoing operations near our borders. The dream remained in my memory, but it did not yet have a place in reality. 2 days passed. Nothing unusual happened. For a moment I wondered if the dream had simply been imagination. But on the 7th of March, something arrived that changed everything. A message from the northern border. It came from a man named Captain Moussa Diallo. And when I read his report, the memory of the dream returned to me with sudden clarity. Because the report described trucks. Trucks moving through the desert at night. Trucks with no license plates. Trucks that kept strange distances between each other. The first sign had appeared. And the story was only beginning. 2 days passed after the dream. At first, life continued in the ordinary rhythm of leadership. Meetings began early in the morning. Reports arrived from different regions of the country. Security briefings covered border patrols, intelligence updates, and the challenges that constantly face our nation. Burkina Faso sits in a region where borders stretch across wide deserts and open land. Many paths exist that are not written on maps. For centuries, people have crossed those lands with camels, trucks, and sometimes on foot. Because of this, our military constantly watches for unusual movement. But during those 2 days, nothing seemed to connect with the dream. Still, I could not forget it. The image of the trucks remained clear in my mind, the long desert road, the spacing between the vehicles, the strange feeling that something hidden was moving through the darkness. On the morning of March 7th, 2026, I received a report that made me pause. It came from the northern border region near Djibo. The officer who sent it was Captain Moussa Diallo. Captain Diallo was not a man who sent dramatic reports. I had worked with him before. He was calm, disciplined, and careful with information. When he reported something unusual, it usually meant the situation deserved attention. The report itself was brief. But the details immediately caught my attention. Security cameras near one of our monitoring posts had recorded several trucks traveling at night along a desert path close to the border. That alone was not unusual. Trucks sometimes travel at night to avoid the daytime heat. But these trucks were different. First, they had no visible license plates. Second, they were not traveling as a normal convoy. Each truck passed separately, leaving a gap of nearly 20 minutes before the next one appeared. Captain Diallo explained that this pattern had repeated several times during the night. One truck passed, then silence, then another truck, then another, each vehicle following the same path through the darkness. The path itself also raised questions. According to the report, the trucks were not using any known transport route. They appeared to be following a narrow dirt trail across the desert, one that was rarely used by commercial traffic. When I finished reading the report, I leaned back in my chair and remained quiet for a moment, because suddenly the dream returned to my mind with remarkable clarity. The spacing between the trucks, the movement through the desert at night, the feeling that they were trying to avoid being seen. For several seconds, I simply stared at the report in my hands. Then I asked for Captain Diallo to be contacted directly. A short time later, we spoke through a secure communication line. His voice was calm, just as it always was. He explained that the cameras had captured multiple trucks during the past 2 nights. None of the vehicles had registered transport documentation with border authorities. He also confirmed something that immediately stood out. The trucks were not moving in groups. They were deliberately separated. To an untrained observer, this might appear like normal traffic, but to someone experienced in security operations, the pattern suggested coordination. People who transport illegal cargo often separate vehicles to reduce the risk of losing everything in a single interception. One truck might be stopped, but the others could escape. As Captain Diallo spoke, I asked several careful questions. Had the trucks been identified? Were there escort vehicles? Did the cameras capture any company markings or transport codes? The answers were all the same. No license plates, no documentation, no visible company markings, just cargo trucks moving silently through the desert at night. When the conversation ended, the room grew quiet. I walked toward the window and looked out across the city of Ouagadougou. The sky was bright with morning light. People moved through the streets below, beginning their day. Children walked to school, vendors prepared their stalls. Life continued normally. Yet somewhere far to the north, trucks were moving through the desert in darkness, and the pattern matched the dream I had seen 2 nights earlier. At that moment, I still did not know what those trucks were carrying. They could have been smugglers transporting fuel. They could have been criminals moving stolen goods. Or perhaps the explanation was something entirely different. But one thought remained with me. The dream had not been random. It had shown trucks moving through the desert at night. Now those same trucks were appearing in real intelligence reports. I felt a quiet unease growing inside my mind. Not fear, but the sense that something hidden was unfolding. Something serious. Before taking any further action, I decided to gather more information. I contacted another officer within our surveillance division. Her name was Major Aisha Konate. Major Konate oversaw our drone monitoring systems across several regions of the Sahel. If unusual traffic was moving across the desert, there was a chance our aerial surveillance had seen something. At that time, I still believed the situation might be small. Perhaps a smuggling operation involving a handful of vehicles. But I wanted to know the truth before making assumptions. Later that day, Major Konate began reviewing drone footage from the border regions between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. What she discovered the following day would change the entire situation. Because the trucks were not simply traveling across the desert. They were following a road that did not officially exist. And when I heard that report, I understood something important. The second sign was becoming clearer. The dream had shown movement. Captain Diallo's report had confirmed the trucks, but Major Konate was about to reveal the path they were using. A hidden road stretching across 3 countries, a road that had been invisible on every official map. And at that moment I began to feel strongly that something larger was unfolding. The signs were beginning to connect, yet the full truth was still waiting to be revealed. The morning of March 8, 2026, began like many others in Ouagadougou, but I remember clearly that something in my mind was unsettled. The report from Captain Moussa Diallo the day before had stayed with me through the night. It was not only the trucks that concerned me. It was the pattern of their movement. Separated vehicles, night travel, no documentation, and a route that did not appear on normal transport records. Those details alone would be enough to justify closer observation. But what made the situation different for me was the dream. The same images had appeared before any report arrived. I am not a man who rushes to conclusions about spiritual matters. Leadership requires caution. Faith must walk beside reason, not replace it. Still, the connection was impossible to ignore. That morning I received a call from Major Aisha Konate. Major Konate was responsible for drone surveillance across several sectors near the borders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. Her team monitored aerial footage constantly, searching for unusual movement in areas where traditional patrols could not easily reach. The Sahel is vast. Some areas stretch for hundreds of kilometers with little more than sand, rock, and wind. Drones allow us to see what would otherwise remain hidden. When Major Konate spoke, her voice carried a tone of careful seriousness. She explained that after reviewing Captain Diallo's report, her team began examining drone recordings from the past several nights. They focused on the region north of Djibo, where the cameras had first detected the trucks. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual, only empty desert, wind blowing across the sand. But when they adjusted the time frames and watched recordings from late night hours, something began to appear. Tracks. Not ordinary tracks left by random travelers, but a consistent path. A narrow dirt line cutting through the desert. The path stretched across the landscape in a way that immediately raised questions. It began near a remote border area connecting Mali and Niger. Then it curved through unmonitored desert terrain. Finally, it crossed quietly into northern Burkina Faso. Major Konate explained something that caught my attention immediately. That road did not exist on any official map, not on civilian transport maps, not on military navigation charts, not even on satellite databases normally used for planning routes. It had been created recently, probably by repeated use of heavy vehicles traveling the same path again and again. Over time, those vehicles had carved a faint road into the desert itself, and until that moment, no one had noticed it. Major Konate's team had only discovered the trail because they slowed the drone footage and examined subtle patterns in the sand. When vehicles pass repeatedly across the same ground, the color of the sand changes slightly. From high above, that difference can be seen. She sent several images to my office. When I studied them, the shape of the road became clear. It was not random. It was deliberate. The route avoided known checkpoints. It avoided populated areas. It avoided paved roads where license plates or transport permits might be inspected. Instead, it crossed the desert through remote land where almost no one traveled. It was a hidden corridor, a path designed specifically to move something without being seen. As I looked at those images, a quiet realization began forming in my mind. The trucks seen by Captain Diallo were using that road, separated by time, moving at night, disappearing again into the desert. And suddenly the dream returned to me once more. The desert road in the dream had also been empty of signs or markers. The trucks had also traveled alone, separated by darkness. The connection between the dream and reality grew stronger with every detail. But even now, we still did not know what the trucks were carrying. Major Konate continued explaining what her team had discovered. Thermal imaging from the drones showed something unusual about several vehicles traveling along that path during the previous night. Cargo trucks normally carry goods such as food, machinery, or fuel containers. These materials produce certain heat patterns that are predictable. But the trucks on this road were different. The heat signatures inside the cargo compartments were irregular. They suggested movement, not mechanical movement, human movement. At that moment, the room around me felt suddenly quiet. I asked Major Konate to repeat what she had just said. She did so calmly. The thermal imaging suggested multiple human bodies inside each cargo container, but the exact number could not yet be confirmed. When the call ended, I remained seated for a long time without speaking. The dream, the trucks, the secret road, and now the possibility that people were inside those vehicles. I did not yet know the full truth, but the pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. 3 separate sources had now pointed to the same hidden movement across the desert, a dream that showed trucks moving through darkness, a border officer reporting vehicles traveling at night, and a drone discovering a secret road used to transport something unseen. Faith and evidence were beginning to stand side by side. Still, one final confirmation would arrive the following day. Not from technology, not from intelligence systems, but from an ordinary man living in the desert, a cattle herder named Amadou Wedraogo. And the words he shared with our soldiers would complete the third sign. When I heard his testimony, everything became clear. The dream, the road, the trucks, and the voices. Because this man had heard those voices in the night, and they were crying for help. On the 9th of March, 2026, the third sign arrived in a way that no intelligence system could have predicted. It did not come from satellites. It did not come from military databases. It came from an ordinary man who lived quietly with his cattle in the desert. His name was Amadou Ouedraogo. Amadou was a herder who spent most of his life moving between grazing areas north of Djibo. Men like him know the desert better than any map ever could. They understand the wind, the ground, and the silence of the night. In places where technology struggles to see, people like Amadou hear everything. That afternoon, a small military patrol was moving through a remote sector near the border. The soldiers were part of a routine monitoring team assigned to observe unusual traffic along desert routes. The patrol stopped briefly near a small cluster of acacia trees where Amadou often rested his animals. The soldiers greeted him politely. Encounters like this are common. In the desert, soldiers and herders share the same space, and mutual respect is important. At first, the conversation was simple. They asked about water conditions. He asked whether the patrol had seen any bandits nearby. But after a few minutes, Amadou said something that caught the attention of one of the soldiers. He asked them a question. Had they heard the crying at night? The soldier who later reported this conversation told me that at first he thought the man might be referring to animals. The desert at night carries many strange sounds, hyenas, jackals, even the wind through dry grass. But Amadou shook his head. No, he said. Not animals. People. For several nights in a row, he explained, trucks had passed through the desert near his grazing area shortly after midnight. He had noticed them because trucks rarely travel that particular route. Most drivers avoid that area because the terrain is rough and poorly marked. But these trucks came every night. They moved slowly, one at a time, the same pattern that Captain Diallo had seen on the cameras. Amadou described how the trucks kept distance between each other, sometimes nearly 20 minutes apart. But the trucks themselves were not what troubled him most. It was what he heard after they passed. From inside the cargo containers, he said, he heard sounds. At first he thought it might be loose cargo striking the walls of the trucks. But then he realized the sounds had rhythm. A knocking, then voices, weak voices, people calling out, some crying. Sometimes the sounds were quiet, almost lost in the wind. Other times they were louder, like someone trying desperately to be heard. Amadou said that once he walked closer to the road when a truck passed, he did not approach too near because he feared the drivers might be dangerous. But as the vehicle moved past him, he clearly heard someone inside shouting and striking the metal walls. The sound stayed with him through the night. He told the soldiers something that struck me deeply when I later read the report. He said he could not sleep after hearing those voices. He said the desert felt different when people were suffering somewhere in the darkness. So when the patrol stopped near him that day, he decided to tell them what he had heard. The soldiers listened carefully. Then they wrote down everything he described. When the patrol returned to their command post, the report moved quickly through the chain of communication. By the time it reached my office in Ouagadougou, evening had already arrived. I read the testimony slowly. Every sentence felt heavier than the one before it, because the third sign was now unmistakable. The dream had shown trucks in the desert. Captain Diallo had reported trucks moving at night. Major Konate had discovered the hidden road they were using. And now, a man living in that desert had heard voices inside the trucks. Voices asking for help. 3 different sources. 3 different forms of warning. A dream, technology, and the testimony of an ordinary citizen. At that moment, I felt something settle inside my mind with complete clarity. This was no longer speculation. Something terrible was moving across our borders. And if we did nothing, it would continue. I walked outside onto the balcony of the building and looked toward the dark horizon. Far to the north, beyond the lights of the city, the desert stretched across the Sahel. Somewhere out there, trucks were moving through the night. Inside those trucks were human beings. People who had likely been deceived, captured, or forced into a journey they did not choose. If those vehicles continued their path across the Sahara, they could disappear into trafficking networks that stretch across continents. And once people vanish into those systems, they are rarely found again. That night, I made a decision. The 3 signs were complete. The dream, the secret road, the voices in the night. Some people might call these coincidences. Others might say they were simply pieces of intelligence gathering. But in my heart, I believed something deeper was guiding us. I believe Jesus Christ was warning us that lives were in danger, and that we had been given just enough information to act. The next step would require courage and precision, because if we moved too early, the trucks might scatter and vanish. If we waited too long, they might cross beyond our reach. So I ordered the formation of a small special investigation group, 12 officers, each chosen carefully, and together they would begin watching that hidden road every hour of the day and night. What we discovered during the next 48 hours would reveal the full truth, and it would lead us to a convoy larger than anyone expected. 75 trucks, moving silently through the desert, carrying more than 900 lives. That night, after I read the report about the desert herder, I could no longer treat the situation as a routine security concern. Something larger was unfolding. The dream had been the first signal. Captain Diallo's report had been the second. Major Konaté's drone discovery had revealed the hidden road. And now Amadou Ouedraogo had heard the voices of people trapped inside those trucks. 4 pieces of information, each arriving from a completely different direction. Yet all of them pointed toward the same truth. Human beings were being transported through the desert in secret. I sat alone in my office for a long time that evening. Outside, Ouagadougou was quiet. The city lights flickered across the streets, and the warm Sahel night settled over the capital. But in my mind, I was far away from the city. I was thinking about the desert, about trucks moving silently across sand, about people trapped in darkness inside metal containers. And I was thinking about the dream that had come days earlier. The same pattern, the same spacing between the trucks, the same desperate voices. I have learned in life that leadership requires 2 kinds of listening. One kind listens to facts. The other listens to conscience. Facts guide decisions, but conscience tells us when something must be done. That night, both were speaking clearly. I felt strongly that what we had seen in these signs was not random. It felt like a warning placed in our path. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough that if we paid attention, we would understand. I believe that sometimes God does not shout. Sometimes he whispers. And the whisper comes through ordinary moments, a dream, a report, a conversation with a man in the desert. For me, that was the moment when the truth settled firmly in my mind. Jesus was guiding us towards something hidden. And if we ignored that guidance, people might suffer in silence. So I decided that the situation required immediate action. But it had to be careful action. If the trafficking network realized we were watching them, they might change their routes or disappear entirely. The desert is wide. Criminal networks survive because they move through places where governments rarely see them. We needed patience and precision. So I ordered the formation of a special investigation team. It would be small, 12 officers in total, each chosen for experience, discipline, and trust. The first person I contacted was Captain Moussa Diallo. His report had first confirmed the movement of the trucks. He understood the terrain and the patterns of illegal transport along that border region. Next, I asked Major Aïcha Konaté to join the operation through her drone surveillance unit. Her team would monitor the secret road from the air. Drones would watch day and night, recording every vehicle that used that path. The third key officer was Lieutenant Idrissa Sawadogo. Sawadogo was one of our best desert reconnaissance specialists. He had spent years navigating remote areas of the Sahel, often traveling for days through places where maps offered little guidance. If any team could quietly observe movement across that hidden road without being detected, it would be his. When the 3 officers joined the investigation group, the plan began to take shape. Our goal was not to stop the trucks immediately. First, we needed to understand the full scale of the operation. How many vehicles were involved? How often did they travel? Where exactly did they enter and leave the desert corridor? These questions would determine how we acted. Over the next hours, surveillance began. Major Konaté's drones moved into position high above the desert. From that altitude, they could observe the hidden road without revealing their presence. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Sawadogo's reconnaissance team quietly positioned observers along distant ridges overlooking parts of the route. Their job was simple. Watch, record, report. No confrontation, no interference, just patience. For 48 hours, the team monitored that secret road. Day and night, the drones remained in the sky. The first night passed quietly. No trucks appeared. The desert looked empty again. But on the second night, shortly after midnight, movement began. Major Konaté's voice arrived through the secure communication channel. Her tone was calm but focused. She told us the drones had detected the first vehicle, a cargo truck entering the hidden road from the direction of the Niger border. The truck moved slowly. Then, as the minutes passed, another vehicle appeared. Then another. Just as Captain Diallo had described, just as the dream had shown, separated by time, moving silently across the sand. The drones followed them carefully. Thermal cameras scanned the cargo containers, and what the sensors revealed made every officer in the room fall silent. Inside each truck were clusters of human heat signatures. Not one or two people. Many. Dozens inside each container. Major Konate counted carefully as each vehicle entered the desert corridor. 5 trucks. 10 trucks. 20. The numbers kept rising. And by the time the convoy had fully formed across the desert path, the total stunned everyone watching the screens. 75 trucks moving through the night, each carrying human lives hidden inside. That was the moment we fully understood the scale of the crime. This was not a small trafficking attempt. This was a massive operation moving hundreds of people across the desert in a single coordinated movement. And suddenly the meaning of the dream became clearer than ever. The trucks, the desert, the voices, everything matched. Jesus had shown me the image days earlier, not so I would admire the dream, but so I would recognize the danger when it appeared. At that moment, there was no longer any doubt about what needed to happen. The trucks had to be stopped. If they continued north across the Sahara, the victims might disappear forever. So we prepared for an operation that would begin before sunrise. A mission that would require speed, coordination, and courage. We named it Operation Sahel's Shield. And before the night ended, our soldiers would move into position to intercept the convoy. During the long hours of that night, the desert became our silent witness. Inside the command room, the lights were dim, so the drone screens could be seen clearly. Officers spoke in quiet voices. Every movement across the desert was followed carefully, second by second. Major Aisha Konate and her drone team had full control of the aerial surveillance. High above the sand, the drones moved slowly in wide circles, their cameras focused on the hidden road that had remained invisible for so long. From that height, the vehicles looked small, almost harmless. But the thermal images told a very different story. One by one, the trucks entered the corridor. Each vehicle followed the same route across the desert, keeping the careful distance that Captain Musa Diallo had first reported. The drivers clearly believed that spreading out the vehicles would protect them from detection. To anyone watching from the ground, it might have appeared as ordinary traffic. But from the sky, the pattern was unmistakable. It was a convoy, a long chain of trucks moving with quiet coordination across land that was meant to hide them. Major Konate began counting carefully. She did not rush. Each vehicle was confirmed before the next number was spoken. 5 trucks, 8 trucks, 12 trucks. The numbers continued to grow. As the minutes passed, the scale of what we were seeing became impossible to ignore. 15 trucks, 22, 30. Inside the room, no one spoke unless it was necessary. Every officer understood the weight of what might be unfolding. Because if each of those trucks carried people as the thermal sensors suggested, the number of victims could be enormous. Then something happened that made the situation even more disturbing. Major Konate switched one of the drones to high-resolution thermal imaging. The camera zoomed carefully toward the rear cargo area of one truck traveling near the middle of the convoy. The heat patterns inside the container were clear. They moved. Clusters of human bodies, packed tightly together, dozens inside a single truck. For several seconds, the room was silent. Some officers looked down at the floor. Others leaned closer to the screen as if hoping the image might somehow be mistaken. But the evidence was clear. People were inside those trucks. Human beings. Not cargo. Not animals. People. The drone continued following the convoy. The trucks stretched across the desert path like a long shadow. And still they kept coming. 40 trucks. 50 trucks. The number passed 60. Then 70. Finally, after careful confirmation, the total number was reached. 75 trucks. 75 cargo vehicles moving through the desert in a single coordinated operation. When Major Konate spoke the final number aloud, I felt a heavy silence settle across the command room, because by that moment we could also estimate the number of victims. If each truck carried even 10 people, the convoy would already represent a terrible crime. But the thermal imaging suggested far more than that. Many trucks appeared to contain 15, 20, sometimes even more individuals packed together inside sealed containers. The possible total was overwhelming. Hundreds of lives were being transported through the desert, and they were likely suffering terribly. Inside those containers, the heat during the day could reach unbearable levels. Air circulation would be almost non-existent. Water would be limited. Some of those people might already be in medical danger. Others could be children, frightened and unable to understand where they were being taken. At that moment, the decision to act became urgent, but it also required careful planning. If we attacked the convoy too early, the trucks could scatter across the desert. Drivers might abandon the vehicles and flee, leaving the victims stranded far from help. We needed a location where the convoy could be stopped safely and completely. After studying the route, Lieutenant Idrissa Sawadogo suggested the best interception point. Near the town of Jibo, there was a narrow stretch of terrain where the hidden desert road passed between rocky ground and a shallow valley. Vehicles traveling that path would have limited options for escape. It was a natural bottleneck. If our forces moved quickly, we could block the route from both directions and secure every truck before the drivers had time to react. I listened carefully to the plan. The more we studied the map, the clearer it became that this was our moment. The convoy was moving exactly along the route we had been watching. The terrain ahead would slow them slightly, and dawn was still hours away. The traffickers believed they were invisible in the darkness. They believed the desert protected them, but they were wrong. For the past 2 nights we had been watching, and the signs that had appeared, the dream, the reports, the hidden road, the testimony of the desert herder had all guided us to this precise moment. If we moved now, we could save those lives. If we hesitated, the trucks might reach another border and disappear. I looked around the room at the officers who had helped uncover the truth. Captain Musa Diallo, Major Aisha Konate, Lieutenant Idrissa Sawadogo. Each of them had played a role in bringing us here. Each of them understood the responsibility we now carried. And in my heart, I felt again the quiet certainty that had been growing since the night of the dream. We had not found this convoy by accident. We had been led to it, not through loud miracles or sudden revelations, but through a series of small signs that, when placed together, revealed the path before us. That realization gave me both humility and determination, because once you believe that God has placed a responsibility in your hands, you cannot ignore it. So I gave the order. The operation would begin immediately. Our soldiers would move toward Jibo. Armored vehicles would block the desert road. Drones would continue tracking every truck. And before the sun rose over the Sahel, the convoy would meet the shield of Burkina Faso. The mission had a name, Operation Sahel Shield, and the next hours would reveal whether we had arrived in time. Once the decision was made, everything moved quickly. The command room in Ouagadougou became a place of focused urgency. Officers spoke quietly but with precision. Orders were transmitted through secure channels. Vehicles began moving across the desert long before dawn. Operation Sahel Shield had begun. The objective was simple in principle but difficult in practice. Stop the convoy. Secure every truck. Rescue the people inside. But the desert is not an easy place for any operation. Distances are long, visibility changes quickly, and when vehicles scatter across open land, even a large force can struggle to contain them. That is why we had to move carefully. Lieutenant Idrissa Sawadogo's reconnaissance team had already identified the narrow stretch of terrain near Jibo that would serve as our interception point. The hidden road curved through rocky ground before descending into a shallow valley. That valley was the key. Once the trucks entered that area, they would have little space to turn around or escape into the open desert. If our forces blocked both ends of the route at the right moment, the convoy would be contained. The operation involved 180 soldiers. Each man understood that lives were at stake. 12 armored vehicles were deployed to form the primary barrier along the road. These vehicles would physically prevent the trucks from moving forward once the convoy reached the interception point. 6 surveillance drones remained in the air. Major Aisha Konate's team guided them across the desert, keeping constant watch on the convoy. Every truck was tracked carefully to ensure none slipped away unnoticed. Inside the command center, we watched the movement unfold in real time. The trucks continued their slow journey through the night. One by one, they approached the valley. The drivers had no idea what awaited them. From their perspective, the desert road remained empty. The darkness hid our soldiers. Our armored vehicles were positioned behind ridges and natural rock formations. Engines remained silent until the moment action would begin. Lieutenant Sawadogo's reconnaissance units watched the convoy from elevated ground. They counted every vehicle. They confirmed the spacing between them. The pattern remained exactly the same. A truck passed. Then darkness returned for several minutes. Then another truck appeared. This separation had been designed to protect the traffickers. Ironically, it now worked against them, because as the vehicles entered the valley one by one, they became easier to contain. By the time the 15th truck arrived at the interception zone, our forces had already begun sealing the road behind them. Armored vehicles moved quietly into position. Soldiers took cover along the edges of the path. Their orders were clear. No unnecessary violence. Secure the drivers. Protect the victims. For several minutes, everything remained tense but silent. Then the lead truck reached the center of the valley. That was the moment. Engines roared to life. Armored vehicles rolled forward and blocked the path ahead. At the same time, the units positioned behind the convoy closed the route from the rear. Within seconds, the narrow desert road was sealed. The drivers realized immediately that something had gone wrong. Several trucks stopped abruptly. Others tried to reverse, but there was nowhere to go. The valley had become a cage. Soldiers moved quickly between the vehicles, securing the drivers and preventing anyone from escaping into the darkness. Some traffickers surrendered without resistance. Others attempted to run but were quickly surrounded by the patrol units positioned along the ridge. Within minutes, the entire convoy had been stopped. 75 trucks stood silent in the desert night. The engines cooled slowly as the soldiers secured the area. But the most important part of the operation was only beginning, because inside those trucks were people, and we did not yet know their condition. Medical teams moved forward immediately. The first cargo container was opened carefully. When the metal doors swung outward, a wave of hot air rushed into the cold desert night. Inside the truck, people were packed tightly together. Their faces were pale with exhaustion. Many were barely able to stand. Some collapsed as soon as fresh air reached them. Soldiers quickly helped them down from the container. Water was brought forward. Medical personnel checked for dehydration and heat exhaustion. The victims looked around in confusion at first. Some seemed afraid that another danger had arrived. But when they realized the soldiers were there to help them, many began to cry. Others simply sat on the ground, too weak to speak. The second truck was opened, then the third. Each container revealed the same heartbreaking scene. Women holding small children, young men barely conscious from thirst, teenagers who looked shocked and terrified. Some had been locked inside the containers for many hours, perhaps longer. As the inspections continued, the full scale of the crime became clear. Truck after truck carried human beings trapped in suffocating darkness. When the final count was completed, the number stunned even the experienced officers who had seen many difficult operations. 912 people had been rescued. 912 lives that might have vanished into the trafficking networks crossing the Sahara. Women, young men, teenagers. Some had been promised work in distant countries. Others had been deceived by recruiters who offered travel opportunities. Instead, they had been captured and transported across the desert like cargo. The traffickers later confessed that their destination was far beyond Burkina Faso. The victims were meant to be sold through networks stretching into North Africa and the Middle East. Once people enter those systems, finding them again becomes nearly impossible. That is why this moment mattered so much. Because the convoy had been stopped before it crossed beyond our reach. Before the desert swallowed the truth. Before those voices in the darkness were lost forever. As the first light of dawn appeared over the Sahel, the rescued victims sat wrapped in blankets beside the road. Medical teams continued providing water and treatment. The soldiers stood nearby, quiet and watchful. I remember looking at the horizon as the sun began to rise. The desert looked peaceful again. But I knew that the events of that night had changed many lives. More than 900 people had been given a second chance. And in my heart I could not forget the path that had led us there. The dream, the reports, the hidden road, the voices in the night. Each sign had guided us step by step until we reached that moment. And now the world would soon learn what had been discovered in the desert. But before speaking publicly, there was still one more truth to face. Because when we finished inspecting the trucks, the full horror inside them became impossible to ignore. When the last truck engine finally went silent, the desert became quiet again. But the quiet did not feel peaceful. It carried the weight of what we were beginning to discover. The soldiers moved carefully from one vehicle to the next, opening each cargo container with the same slow caution. No one rushed. Every door might reveal people in fragile condition, and we had to be prepared to help them immediately. The first truck had already shown us the truth, but as more containers were opened, the full reality became impossible to ignore. Inside each truck, human beings had been packed together in spaces never meant for people. The containers were sealed with metal doors and thick latches. From the outside, they looked like ordinary cargo units used for transporting goods across long distances. But inside there was no cargo, only bodies pressed tightly together. Some people had been sitting on the floor for hours, unable to stretch their legs. Others had leaned against the metal walls, their strength slowly fading in the desert heat. The air inside those containers had become suffocating. When the doors opened, many victims inhaled deeply as if they had been underwater and finally reached the surface. Some collapsed as they stepped down from the trucks. Others remained sitting quietly, their eyes wide with confusion, trying to understand where they were. Medical teams moved quickly among them. Water was distributed first. In the desert, dehydration becomes dangerous faster than most people realize. Even a few hours without water inside a sealed metal container can push the body to its limits. Many victims had dry lips and trembling hands. Some were weak enough that soldiers had to carry them away from the trucks and place them on blankets under temporary shelters. As the inspections continued, we began to understand who these people were. Most of them were young men hoping to find work somewhere beyond the desert. Young women who had been promised opportunities in distant cities. Some were teenagers who looked barely older than children. There were also mothers holding small children in their arms. When the containers opened, some children cried softly in confusion. Others simply clung tightly to their parents. None of them understood how they had arrived in that place. Many victims spoke different languages: French, Hausa, Fulani, Arabic dialects, and others common across West Africa. But even when words were different, their expressions told the same story: fear, exhaustion, and a deep uncertainty about what would happen next. As soldiers and translators spoke gently with them, the pieces of the story began to emerge. Most had been recruited by traffickers who promised transportation to jobs in other countries. Some believed they were traveling toward Europe. Others thought they would work in construction or agriculture somewhere in North Africa. Instead, they had been moved through a chain of smugglers across several borders. Each stage of the journey took them deeper into a system they did not understand. By the time they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. Passports had been taken. Phones had been confiscated. They were placed inside trucks and told to remain silent. Some victims said they had been inside the container since the previous afternoon. Others believed it had been even longer. The traffickers had provided minimal water. Food was almost non-existent. The goal was simple: move as many people as possible across the desert before anyone noticed. Later interrogation of the captured drivers revealed the rest of the plan. The convoy had been traveling north through Burkina Faso before crossing toward Libya. From there, the victims would be separated and sold into different trafficking routes. Some might have been forced into labor, others into illegal migration networks, some into situations far darker. Once victims disappear into those networks, they are often lost for years, sometimes forever. That was the future waiting for the people inside those trucks. 912 lives moving silently toward exploitation. When the final truck was inspected and the last victims were brought out into the open air, the number was confirmed. 912 people had been rescued. 912 human beings who had been hidden inside 75 cargo trucks. The soldiers stood quietly as the count was completed. Even for experienced officers, the number felt overwhelming. Human trafficking often hides behind small operations. A few people moved across a border. A handful of victims found in a remote area. But this convoy revealed something far larger. An organized network capable of moving hundreds of people at once through secret desert routes. A network that believed the desert would hide its crimes. As dawn spread across the horizon, the rescued victims sat together beneath temporary shelters. Medical teams continued checking their condition. Some people were already beginning to recover their strength. Others remained weak but stable. In those early morning hours, the desert air cooled slightly, offering relief after the suffocating heat of the containers. I remember watching the scene from a distance for several minutes. No speeches, no cameras, just people sitting quietly in the sand, wrapped in blankets, drinking water slowly. Many of them looked at the soldiers with disbelief. Perhaps they had expected violence. Instead, they found protection. One young man approached a soldier and asked a simple question: "Are we safe now?" The soldier nodded. "Yes," he said, "you are safe." Those words may seem small, but for people who had spent hours trapped in darkness, they meant everything. That morning we began transporting the victims to medical facilities and support centers where they could receive care. International organizations would later assist with identification and safe return to their home communities. But at that moment, the most important thing was simple. They were alive, and they were free. Later that day, I prepared to speak publicly about what had happened, because the world needed to understand two things. First, the scale of the crime that had nearly passed unnoticed through the desert. And second, the lesson hidden within the story. A lesson about listening, because sometimes the signs that save lives appear quietly. A dream, a report, a hidden road, a voice heard in the night. The question is not whether those signs exist. The question is whether we choose to listen. The morning of March 11th, 2026, the desert operation had already become known across the country. News travels quickly when something extraordinary happens. Soldiers returning from the north had shared the first reports. Medical teams had confirmed the number of rescued victims. Journalists were beginning to ask questions. By midday, I stood before the press in Ouagadougou. Cameras were set up across the room, microphones rested on the podium, reporters from Burkina Faso and several international outlets had gathered to hear what had happened during the night in the desert. But before speaking, I paused for a moment, because what had occurred was not only a military success, it was a reminder of something deeper. The convoy of 75 trucks had nearly disappeared into the Sahara. If the timing had been slightly different, those vehicles might have crossed another border before we discovered them. If our patrol had arrived only a few hours later, the victims could have vanished into trafficking networks that stretch across continents. 912 people might have been lost. When I began speaking to the press, I explained the facts clearly. Our forces had intercepted a convoy moving through a secret desert route. Inside the trucks were hundreds of people transported illegally by a trafficking network. The victims had been rescued and were receiving care. The drivers and coordinators had been arrested. But after sharing those details, I said something else. Something that many people did not expect to hear. I told them that the operation had begun with 3 signs. Not 3 military strategies. 3 signs. The first sign had been a dream that showed trucks moving through the desert at night. The second sign had come through intelligence and technology. Reports from the border. Drone surveillance discovering a hidden road. And the third sign had come from an ordinary citizen. A cattle herder who heard voices inside passing trucks and chose to speak. Each sign alone might have seemed small. A dream could be ignored. A single report might not attract attention. One person's testimony could be dismissed as imagination. But when the 3 signs appeared together, they formed a message. And that message led us to act. As I spoke those words, I noticed that the room had grown very quiet. Some journalists wrote quickly in their notebooks. Others simply listened. Because the lesson was not only about security, it was about awareness. Sometimes people believe that divine help arrives only through spectacular miracles, lightning in the sky, voices from heaven, events that no one can doubt. But life rarely works that way. More often, guidance appears quietly. A feeling that something is wrong, a piece of information that does not fit, a person who notices something unusual and decides to speak. These moments may seem small, but when we pay attention to them, they can reveal the truth. In this case, those small signs saved more than 900 lives. If I had ignored the dream, I might have dismissed Captain Diallo's report as routine border activity. If we had ignored the drone discovery, the hidden road might have remained unnoticed. If the soldiers had ignored the desert herder, the voices inside the trucks might never have been heard. Each step depended on listening, not only with intelligence systems, but with humility. Humility allows leaders to accept that wisdom can arrive from many directions. From soldiers, from technology, from ordinary citizens, and sometimes from quiet moments in prayer. As the press conference ended, one reporter asked me a simple question. "Mr. President," he said, "do you believe this operation was guided by faith?" I thought about the question carefully before answering. Faith is a powerful word. It means different things to different people. But for me, the answer was clear. I said that I believe Jesus Christ sometimes guides people through signs that appear in everyday life, not to create fear, not to create pride, but to invite responsibility. When we recognize those signs, we have a choice. We can ignore them, or we can act. In this story, we chose to act. And because we acted, more than 900 human beings were given another chance to live freely. That is the lesson I carried away from the desert. Not that miracles always arrive with thunder, but that God sometimes speaks through the quiet connections between events. The dream, the road, the voices, when placed together, they revealed the truth. And when we listened, lives were saved. When I think back to that week in March, I often return to a simple image, the desert at sunrise. After the operation had ended, I stood for a moment on the edge of the valley where the trucks had been stopped. The sand stretched toward the horizon, glowing softly under the morning light. From a distance, nothing about that place suggested what had happened during the night. The desert looked calm again. The wind moved across the sand just as it had for centuries. Yet I knew that beneath that quiet landscape, something important had taken place. More than 900 people had been rescued from a path that might have led to years of suffering. And the path that led us to them began with something as small as a dream. Moments like that remind me why leadership must always remain connected to conscience. Power alone cannot guide a nation. Strength alone cannot protect people. A leader must also listen. Listen to the quiet signals that appear when something is wrong. Listen to the voices of ordinary citizens. Listen to the wisdom that faith can bring to the human heart. The world we live in today often feels divided. Nations argue with each other. Communities struggle with fear and uncertainty. And sometimes people begin to believe that kindness and justice are becoming rare. But the story of those 75 trucks tells a different truth. It reminds us that good people still exist everywhere. The soldiers who acted with courage, the officers who investigated patiently, the drone operators who watched through the night, the desert herder who spoke when he heard voices in the darkness. Each of them played a role in protecting life. And above all, I believe that God placed those signs before us so that we would not miss the moment when action was needed. That belief gives me hope. Hope for Africa. Hope for the world. Because if people continue to listen to conscience and compassion, then even the darkest crimes can be brought into the light. Human trafficking is one of the great injustices of our time. It turns human beings into commodities. It destroys families. It feeds on desperation and poverty. But every time such a crime is exposed, the world moves one step closer to ending it. That is why this story matters. Not because it praises one person, but because it shows what can happen when people pay attention and act together. Today I continue to pray for the people who were rescued from those trucks. I pray that they will rebuild their lives. I pray that they will find safety, dignity, and opportunity in the future. And I pray that the networks responsible for trafficking human beings will one day disappear completely from our world. But that future depends on all of us. Every nation, every community, every person. We must refuse to ignore the suffering of others. We must speak when something is wrong. And we must always choose the path that protects life rather than exploiting it. If you are listening to this story today, I invite you to reflect on one simple question. What signs might appear in your own life? Perhaps a moment when someone needs help. Perhaps a truth that others are ignoring. Perhaps a quiet voice inside your heart telling you that something must be done. Do not ignore those moments. Because sometimes the smallest decision can protect someone else's life. And sometimes a single voice speaking the truth can change the course of events. If this story has moved you, I encourage you to share your thoughts with others who are listening. Your words might inspire someone else to pay attention to the signs around them. And if you wish to hear more stories like this, stories about faith, courage, and the defense of human dignity, you are welcome to continue following this channel. Together we can keep these conversations alive, not for entertainment, but for awareness and for hope. Because hope is something the world always needs. And now, as I close this story, I will say one thing clearly. I speak not as a hero, but as a witness to what happened. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. These words I have shared are true. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. And what I have told you comes from events that truly occurred. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. And this story is the truth I carry with me from the desert. May peace grow across Africa. May justice grow across the world, and may we all continue choosing the path that protects life.